Greetings, and welcome to Episode 4 of Ray Reads Just for You. I'm your host, Raymond Steers. It's Wednesday, February 9th, 2022, and outside the snow has devolved into a shell of its former self, something akin to the anguish of muddy slush. Today's letter comes from a Ms. Madeline Chairline from the town of Wyandra in the Shire of Paroo, Queensland, Australia, who describes herself as 51, a former beauty queen, well-read and traveled, a fantastic cook, and in generally good spirits, except lately. Madeline writes, I've always loved stories of the wild American West, but I do wonder how true they ring. Could you read, just for me, something from that genre based on fact? Indeed, Madeline, I can and I will. This book was printed in 1941, after almost 10 years of painstaking research into the Cheyenne Native American tribes of the 1870s and the Oklahoma Territory, and was eventually made into a popular film by the famed Western director John Ford in 1964. This is just for you, Madeline, starting on page 21. In a little while, Mrs. Miles came into the office with a plate of sugar cookies. She had been nervous for her husband, but when she saw how quiet everything in the room was, she smiled cheerfully and offered the cookies to the two chiefs. When they refused, she seemed surprised and hurt. I've never known one of them to refuse my cookies before, she said plaintively. These northern Cheyennes are kind of wild, uncivilized, Seeger explained. They look hungry enough, Mrs. Miles said. Now look here, Lucy, her husband protested. This may be serious. We have to talk with these men, and we've already sent for Edmund to interpret. Now you'd better go back into the house and wait for me there. If you wish. Shall I leave the cookies here? Miles nodded absently, and she set the plate down on the desk and went out. He took out his watch, a large silver turnip, and stared at it impatiently. Where is he? He demanded of Seeger. Seeger shrugged and went on smoking. It was hot and close in the room, and the two old chiefs smelled of horses and rawhide and burnt wood. Seeger rose, went to the window, and wrenched it up. Miles began to nibble at one of the cookies. His head still ached, and he had not taken the cold bath he had planned. They're here, Seeger said. Trueblood was panting as he led Garrier into the room. I ran down to the village, he gasped. I thought... Seeger grinned maliciously, and Miles said, Would you mind taking notes, Joshua? Trueblood nodded and began to busy himself with pad and pencil, trying desperately to regain his composure. Garrier wiped the sweat from the inside of his hatband and then from his face, nodded at the two chiefs, and then addressed them in nimble Cheyenne. He left out all the ceremony and attempted to be businesslike, as white men were. Ask them what they want here, Miles said. If it's food they want, tell them to go back to their camp and I'll have some extra rations sent down. It's not food, Garrier said. They want to go home. Well, then let them go home. I'm certainly not keeping them here. Tell them they can go as soon as they please. They don't mean to their camp, Garrier explained. They mean home to Wyoming. Now that's impossible, Miles cried, slapping his hand down on the desk. That's out of the question. Tell them it's impossible. As a matter of fact, they know it's impossible. Tell them no one can leave Indian territory without permission from Washington, and make it clear to them that the Great White Father is not giving such permission. This is to be the home of the Indians for all time to come, and it will be just the sort of home that they make it. If they're lazy and worthless and lie in their lodges all day, then they will be repaid and coined like kind. Make that clear to them. They have to stay here. Garrier translated, and Joshua Trueblood scribbled in his notebook. Seeger puffed his pipe stolidly. When the half-breed had finished speaking, the two chiefs glanced at each other. An expression of hopeless, dazed uncertainty had come over the features of Dull Knife. He shook his old head wearily and made as to go. But Little Wolf laid an affectionate yet restraining hand on the old man's arm. Little Wolf began to speak, and the half-breed translated directly in the first person. He was less at ease translating from Cheyenne into English, and he chose his words carefully, eyeing Trueblood, who was scribbling in the notebook. "For how long must we stay here?" Little Wolf said evenly, never raising his voice. "Until all of us are dead? You mock my people for staying in their lodges, yet what would you have them do? Work? Hunting is our work. We always lived that way, and we never starved. For as long as men can remember, we lived in a country of our own, a land of meadows and mountains and tall pine forests. There was no sickness, and few of us died. Since we've been here, we have all been sick, and many of us have died. We've starved, and we've watched our children's bones poke out the skin. Is it so terrible that a man should want to go back to his own home? If you can't give us permission to go, let some of us go to Washington and tell them how we suffer. Or send to Washington and get permission for us to leave this place before we are all dead." And Madeline, there you have a little taste of what empire builders do to indigenous peoples, a truth that's been repeated since the dawn of civilization itself. That's all we have time for today. I'm your host, Raymond Steers, and this has been Ray Reads Just for You.